We don't color on the dog. We will go to all reaches to find our guest. And we found Robert Bender in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with his family on spring break. So, Supervisor, thank you for coming on.
Sure. No, I want to get some of this correct information out. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, Rick.
All right, so we've got a bill that's been passed by the Florida Legislature, Senate and House. It's going to the governor for signature. What are some of the and what are some of the things that stood out to you in this bill that we've got to get prepared for not this election but in 2027?
Right. So I think that's the important thing. A lot of this, some things go into effect when it's signed, but a lot of it regarding the citizenship and the documents needed to vote do not go into effect until January 1, 2027. So it'll be after the 2026 gubernatorial election. So we can get through those with the current procedures and everything like that. The other thing is that it's already a requirement that you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. So this is giving us the ability to check that. It's tying in some responsibilities of the Department of Motor Vehicles on how they get us that information, because I'd probably say 95% of my voter registrants come through the motor voter and DMV. So it gives them an opportunity to indicate the paperwork that was presented in that transaction, and then it goes to their voter record. Same thing if they come in, we don't have to take photocopies of it. We just check to say which documents were presented. So if you're already a voter, we've already run your information. The state ran my database through the SAVE database last fall, and we have been in contact with those people. I will say some of them are difficult cases. I am probably going to have to hire an immigration attorney or specialist or something like that to work through those. And some of these are people that have had a passport before, or who have been indicated as a citizen, and then their status changes, or they aren't clear that permanent resident doesn't mean citizen. Again, that doesn't mean you're eligible to vote, but they don't even know what they've always maybe been told by their parents that they were a citizen. And so it is working through some of those, but the new registrants coming in will have to provide proof of U.S. citizenship, and the documents that are accepted are listed in this bill. But also it tells us how we do voter list maintenance procedures if we come across them. Again, we've been in contact with these people. The information we're getting from the state, it gives us an opportunity to contact the voter and ask them for more information, right? Just as with felons and things like that, you don't get automatically removed. There is some due process. And that's how we've come across these other cases, is that we reached out to them and said, hey, we've come across some information that says you may not be a citizen. Can you provide some citizenship documents? And so, again, it's an opportunity to contact them. And then we say, hey, if we don't hear from you within 30 days, you'll be removed. And we've done that. So, I mean, other times it's been office errors. They happen all across the state, that the box isn't checked, or they check that they're not a citizen. And when you have a few thousand registrants to process, like we did in 2020, sometimes some people slide through. I'll also say a number of those hadn't voted. So it's, and I'd say the majority of the non-citizens that we've seen haven't voted. Some of the ones that have were voting back in 96. And again, it's this not knowing their status, or they even indicated at some point they were a citizen. So I am happy to have this additional resource that we can check citizenship. And again, it's just another tool in the toolbox that we're using to clean up our voter rolls.
Do you foresee having to hire more people with the registration, more focus on it, or you have to staff up a little bit more?
I don't think so. I think what the extending the date until 27 allows DHSMV and the Division of Elections to work through those processes and see how we're going to get the information, again, that's already being presented by the voter if they're at the DMV. And so, we may have to be going into David more. We have access to do that. And so, for instance, if somebody calls in or sends us a vote by mail request, gives us a driver's license that isn't in their file, we go into David and check it, and then we are allowed to update their driver's license in our system. That's the only one that I'm aware of that we're able to actually update the information in the file. But again, we have access to that system. And so, there is some indication of a citizenship status already on some of those. And so again, it's just how the two systems are going to communicate, and it's going to give them some time to figure that out instead of trying to rush it before an election. Because if we were trying to do this right before, early July, if it was a July 1 start date, we're sending ballots out that week. I mean, we're already in full election mode. And to try to implement a new system, we've seen how those rollouts happen. So the fact that we can get past the midterms and hopefully it eases some fears of the voters as to what it's going to be like voting. It'll give us almost a little over a year before the presidential preference primary in March of 28 to get this in place. And again, our office will contact anyone that we come across that hasn't that might have had a question raised or something like that. So hopefully it gives everybody time to get registered.
So let's that's on the voter registration part. About how will in 2028, unless there's some special election before then, but in 2028, what's going to change when someone goes to vote?
So one of the things that will change is the acceptable form of identification. There was a big push to get the student IDs out. And I think even like the HOA that are currently allowed.
Out, you mean eliminate the student IDs?
Eliminate the student IDs. So, right. So if you go to vote in 28, you can still do the driver's license or identification card from Florida, U.S. passport or passport card, United States Uniformed Services or Merchant Marine Identification military ID, veteran health identification card issued by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, a concealed carry, a weapon or firearm license, or any employee identification card issued by the branch department, agency, or entity of the federal government, the state, a county, or municipality, excluding identification cards issued by an educational institute. So right now, and the way I say is, think of the villages. They probably have their own, it's a huge senior, living. They probably have their own identification cards. So currently, right now, you could use that to vote. I don't think the HOA I have has an identification card, but people wouldn't know that. So I think it helps clean it up. We've had the requirement, I think, to show identification since before 2000. It hasn't been challenged in court. 80% of our voters who voted in 24, in general, did a photo ID. The other 20% were vote by mail that gave us their driver's license or the last four of their social just to get the ballot. And then we compared their signature on the back end. I do think it cleans it up. And there's some concern about, students that move up and having time to get an identification card other than their student ID. But again, you should have some time or you have that passport and that should, so again, for most people won't be a problem. Again, the real ID though, it just shows that you've shown original documents right? It's not saying that you're a citizen. So it's saying that, because it'll say if they're, non-citizen or immigrant, I think on there. And so, but it just shows that they've shown their birth certificate from another country. And so we don't have that, a mark on the driver's license currently.
As far as mail-in ballots, are there any changes there? Vote by mail?
I haven't seen any. I think the state's done a pretty good job in updating that. Again, the list gets wiped clean every year after a general election, and you have to give that driver's license or last four of the social to renew the request. And it's good for till the next general election. So I don't see that there. One thing that was coming up was, they sort of kind of cleaned up the candidate qualifying changes about, how a candidate had to be a member of the party for a year. But there was really no way to, who refuted that or who could sue to stop it. So I think they cleaned that up a little bit. And then, there was another one that was in there about using our express votes. And because they have a barcode on there and, it was saying that you could only use a paper ballot with a pen or marker, which we didn't want because we were afraid people would start using Sharpies and then that bleeds through. And so we didn't see anything. I don't think anything was in the final bill on that. Escambia County has them. We don't use them as much as some of the other counties around the state. It's really for disabled voters, but any voter can use it, right? It has enlarged print. You can hear audio. You can usually, if someone is on their third ballot at a precinct, we put them on that because they can change their selections, and then they can confirm their selections before they hit print, and then they walk it over and put it in a tabulator. And I think that's the difference between what we're seeing in some of the other counties across the country, is that machine also is a tabulator. And I think that's where some people are having issue with that. But in Florida, they can't also be a tabulator. They print out a ballot and your selections are clearly written across the ballot.
And then
you walk it over to the tabulator and feed it in.
Do you think the new law is going to, impact the number of students that vote in an election? It will make it harder for them to vote?
I certainly hope not, right? I mean, our job is that any eligible voter has the opportunity to vote, and the vote is counted. And so we hopefully it doesn't make it difficult. It just may mean that they need to be more proactive when they get onto campus. And and listen, I think Scott Lunsford does a great job. I wouldn't be surprised if he takes his mobile machine out to UWF to give them an opportunity to get a new driver's license. Maybe they do that during orientation. Maybe it gives him an opportunity to reach out to the college campuses and offer that service. So, I think especially in Escambia County, we shouldn't have as much of a problem. But you see FSU, they have a very large number of students that will come in on election day and change their address to Tallahassee, Leon County, and so that may make it a little bit more difficult. Again, they'll need to plan ahead for the elections. Request that vote by mail ballot if they're already a registered member, which they would have to be to move their registration.
I guess the other concern is for senior citizens, Robert, is that some of them may not have all this type of documentation. How can we help them, or what can they do?
Right, and that's a good point. Like I pointed out the villages, but of course we have some assisted living facilities where a lot of them don't drive, maybe not have an ID card, and so I think we'll have to make
maybe some of those things.
And I think that's again the concern that we've heard, and we've heard stories about. People don't have their divorce certificate or, the filing and can't find this. And it was in other states and it was 50 years ago. I mean, they just may not be able to get to some of that documentation. So, for the name changes. So hopefully, again, that'll be more on the new registrant side, and hopefully we can work through it. Just as we say with candidates, don't wait till the last minute. This will be a process, and we'll be here to help any way we can to help the voter.
Yeah, this is, the much of this bill and changes that are being made at the federal level or discussed at the federal level have been about reducing opportunities for voter fraud. Do we have a lot of voter fraud going on in Escambia County?
We don't. Our database was run through SAVE by the state. They initially had a 1,028 hits out of 200,000, of which 984 were U.S. citizens. So we had 44 out of over 200,000 that came back as non-citizens. Again, some of those were office errors. I would say pretty close to 50% hadn't even voted. And so, but again, that we want clean rolls, right? So one is one too many, but we just didn't have the tools to necessarily check that before. And so again, we've cleaned those off, and now that that's clean, this gives us an opportunity to continue to keep it clean as we put new people on. And so again, I think I did the math. I had removed 20 in 2025. 11 had not voted, 13 had. 6 were Republicans, 2 were NPAs, and 5 Democrats that had voted. So it's not like all were one party. And again, some of those were from the 90s. Not as many recently. I will say that not as many had voted recently, but still some of them had voted.
So in looking at this, how big a staff do you have right now, Robert?
I think we're down to 14.
And you think that's going to be, is that number, you think your staffing is what you're going to work with this new system? Or
we are down some in our voter services, and we're currently ramping up for that for the election. And so, like I said, in 2020, they had thousands of applications that came in very close to the deadline that they were trying to push through. And that's where some of those mistakes happened. I have great staff. Most of them have joined me after 2020, and so. I mean, if we have a big push like we did, but we all step up and do it. I mean, I've gone out there and started processing applications before. So, you know, having a small office, we all pitch in and make sure it gets done. I mean, of course, some do more than others because that is their job as voter services. But no, I think, again, if it's through DMV, they'll just indicate which documentation was provided at the DMV, and that would meet the requirement. And so we are investigating some of these cases. We're learning a lot, like I said, a lot more about election law. I mean, not election law, immigration laws and people's statuses and how you become naturalized. And if you're, you know, we had one that was 3 years old and her parents became naturalized, but maybe she never made it. And how does that, you know, but maybe her parents had always told her that she had been. And so, again, not an excuse, but that's the truth that we're dealing with, is that these individuals don't know their true status as well.
All right, Robert, get back to your vacation. Yeah. I appreciate it. Wi-Fi works on the boat.
Wi-Fi works. So let me just make sure we've covered everything here. Some of my notes here. We covered the citizenship. Again, I will say, and you know David Stafford well, I am not by any means by saying that David didn't do his job. We just have more tools in the last 2 years than he did when he left in 24. So I think our voter rolls are the cleanest they've ever been, right? The state is sending us people that surrender their driver's license in another state. That started in 24. We now have the SAVE database. That started in 25. We are working with all the organizations throughout the state to make sure that Florida's rolls are the cleanest. And so I'm glad that we have those tools and those resources, but also want to stress that we do give everyone their due diligence and their day in court, and don't just remove them without contacting them and letting them give us additional information to prove otherwise. I appreciate it, Rick.
Thank you. All right, we're going to close out. Leave it on your computer just a little bit, because we'll never find you again. Just make sure all the files get loaded up.
Where in the world, right? Okay.
That's it. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. And to keep up with what's going on, be sure and subscribe. Just click on the little dog to the right and click the subscribe button. You can also like this video and click on the bell, which will notify you of new content. This really helps the channel grow. We appreciate you.